The video that you're about to watch is truly unique because I will be demonstrating my blood work results after 3 years on raw vegan diet. What makes it unique though is that this data will be compared to my personal baseline collected from the years preceding me going on raw diet. I will be demonstrating you blood work results from 2018, 19, 20, 21, and after 3 years on raw diet. Why it is valuable? It is valuable because I will be showing you data. For example, using certain supplements, having an acute inflammation, and so on and so forth. So we will have not only statistics, but we will also have certain factors that explicitly influence certain metrics. What I want to admonish you about is that this video will be, I will disappear, so I will be showing you a presentation, analytical presentation. And before we start looking at the plots, I want to tell you a few nuances. So first of all, the data will be normalized because I want to show you percent change that was incurred by the raw vegan diet. And basically, this has importance not only because it makes data more readable, more like, it's easier to trace the trends, but it also will allow me to plot several parameters on one graph. Because imagine the situation, parameter 1 is like some milligrams per deciliters or milli something per deciliter in thousands, right? This one will be like in 0.001. So to be able to trace the changes, the trends for different parameters plotted on the same graph, I normalize them. So I will bring them up to certain baseline. And this data that you will see will be normalized to raw vegan level. So raw diet will be at 1 or at 100%, and everything else will fluctuate around it. So this is what you will see on each plot. Another thing that I want to mention is that it is in my principal interest, and as a scientist, I am entitled to reporting the most accurate information known to me. And this is why you can choose, you can be confident to trust this video. I'm not disguising any data. And I'm going to show you, the purpose of this video is to demonstrate, of course, what raw diet does biochemically with the body. At the same time, the value of this video will be in that it is important to employ analytical tools available to us in order to determine some weak spots that we can easily correct. Because what I see happening a lot is that people feel something is wrong, something is off, and they say that the diet doesn't work. Instead of going to the doctor and pinpointing something very simple, likely it's usually something very simple to fix, and target that parameter with certain simple actions. So this is what I will likely illustrate to you. There are ups and downs. There are things that got better. There are things that stayed the same. There are things that got worse. And believe me, the trends will be really interesting. So I would like to invite you for a deep dive. And if you ever get bored watching this video, let me know what time code it is when you lost the track. So lost track of things, and we will try to correct it because I really want you to receive full spectrum of information that was available to me at the time. So let's start with our presentation. And thank you for watching. Please hit like and subscribe before we start because it may get too entertaining for you to remember to do those simple things. So let's go through the outline of my presentation. So first I will demonstrate you the general blood test. It will be a little bit an overwhelming looking plot, but you will get the points. Then the second slide that I will demonstrate will be related to iron. Then we'll go look at electrolytes. This for those who love to speculate about distilled water. Then number 4 will be related to protein. This is another point of tension, and then we will look at other parameters. You will see which. So first, I will go ahead and open the general test. So this is that scary looking plot. What is happening here? On the horizontal axis, we have white blood cell, red blood cell, hemoglobin, hematocrit. We have mean corpuscular volume, mean corpuscular hemoglobin, then hemoglobin concentration, then red blood cell distribution width, and platelet count. So everything that you will find if you go to the doctor and order general blood test. So the colors correspond to years. So 2018, 19, 20, 21. 2021 iron corresponds to me doing blood work after a month on iron supplement. And then year 2023 is when I had been raw. 2021 tests, for your reference, was in the very beginning of the year. I just switched to raw diet. It was like probably 2 weeks on raw diet or less. And this one was 1 month in with iron supplement. So this is what we're dealing with. I'll be using markup here. We'll do a brush. So we're focusing on this parameter now. White blood cell count. As you see, I normalized all the data to the raw state, so at 100%. You see the scale bar starts from 60%, goes to 140. And what we cannot ignore, this elephant in the room. In 2018, I had very high white blood cell count. White blood cell count can increase in response to acute inflammation. And this data point is valuable. Why? Because in 2018, so here, I had actual inflammation of my sebaceous gland. So this data point corresponds to how my body responds to actual inflammation present. I went to the doctor to just check what's up with that thing. Make sure that it's something benign. And this data for other years, you can see it fluctuates in some range. And we see here that on raw diet, apparently my white blood cell count goes up. What's the reason for that? First of all, white blood cell count is a very reactive parameter. So these data points could be accumulated on a fasted state. For example, I hadn't eaten anything then. And here I had 2 meals because I went to do this blood work at 2 p.m. So this one was after I already had lunch. Then I went through Uber. White blood cell count literally can increase in response to stress. It happens very quickly. You don't even need to sleep overnight and then see the result. No, it's a very reactive parameter. So whatever happened there apparently spiked my white blood cell count, and it could be someone sneezed or you endured some stress. Here, it's still much lower than what we see with acute inflammatory condition going. So I'm not worried about this metric. Again, it's a very reactive thing. And interesting would be to know what exactly caused this spike, but unfortunately I wouldn't be able to trace it down. So now that we went through the white blood cell count, I suggest that we move now to the data point related to red blood cell count. Here you can see fluctuation around my present norm, so raw data. I wouldn't comment anything significant happens here, other than it did drop compared to 2021 when I was on iron supplement, increased a little bit again relatively to the preceding years. Commenting on significance of this change also is pretty challenging if we take this data out of context. So what we need to look at now, some very important parameters, are hemoglobin. Then we'll need to look at the mean corpuscular volume, MCHC, and this data point. So I will hop straight on this data. So what I dislike here is that distribution of sizes of red blood cells increased drastically compared to all preceding data. So the jump was from 0.9 to 1 here. And this indicates that I am likely B12 or folate deficient. So this is a very important data point because here we see somewhat reduction of hemoglobin that can be also associated with either iron deficient anemia, which iron I get 200% a day, if you recall my video with nutritional analysis. So from dietary sources, I'm supposed to be getting 200% daily value of iron. So this one, we see hemoglobin dropped. Then distribution of red blood cells increased. My doctor unfortunately overlooked this thing, and she, just looking at this data and at my iron measurements, not knowing the history of my blood work, she overlooked this factor. But this is straight indicative that I am limited likely by B12 or folate. Distinguishing the two will require, of course, the blood work that she also didn't include, so actually do not have data for B12 or folate. Given that if you look at the supplements, folate supplements, for example, folate supplements will have times less percent RDV included than they would usually include B12. Plus, I am currently not supplementing with B12. I'm getting my B12 from seaweed, and this is not a reliable source. You really need to know your supplier. You really need to know the conditions in which the seaweed was processed. And another thing, of course, I think that I'm not limited in how I extract nutrients from seaweed, but this to me says that I need to use B12 supplement. So this is a very critical parameter. But I'm going to do blood work to distinguish whether it's folate deficiency or B12, because folate I also get through the roof. I get 300% RDV. And in general, plants, fruits, greens, they're a very good source of folate. So I don't think that is the point of concern. I think I'm B12 limited. Another thing to note here is that I was never off the supplement for B12 ever in my life before, except for this like half a year. And what we see here also, another thing that supports this, is that MCH dropped. MCHC dropped. So it's at its historic minimum, which tells to me that whatever the cause of this hemoglobin deficiency, which like can associate with anemia, all of these parameters tell me that there is risk of developing anemia. All of these things suggest that I need to take measures to correct whatever caused this problem to happen. So this tells me that it's B12 or folate, and these other data points tell me that it is a problem. So I cannot play with that. Noteworthy thing is that all values are still within the reference range, so I'm not pushing the boundaries anywhere. But looking at the trends is what makes me concerned. So, for example, again, this is unprecedented trend. This is unprecedented trend for me. This is a concerning thing, this drop of hemoglobin value. This tells me that I need to do something. And this thing too, you see how my mean corpuscular value or volume dropped on the supplement and then it bounced back. These things, I am going to analyze further. Now, why am I not talking about iron deficiency? Now we actually need to look at the iron. So here I actually put reference values here, you see, because they are of immediate relevance here to demonstrate, because they will explain certain things. So I showed you the data 2021 and after 1 month on iron supplement. So here are also normalized values. 100% is on raw diet, green bar everywhere. So why was put on the supplement before? Because you see in 2021, 2019, 2020, I had very low ferritin, barely hitting the reference zone. The upper limit is up high there, so it's like very, very high. So on supplement, my ferritin did increase here. But look at the iron, look at the saturation. Doctor just looked at it because it was exceeding the maximum of reference range by so much here and here. It was just reaching some dangerous levels, so they decided to remove the supplement from my regimen. With that in mind, they prescribed me literally in this beginning of 2021. They prescribed me a diet rich in legumes and greens. Before then, 2019, 2021, I don't have data for 2018 here, I was on the diet here with this low ferritin. I was on the diet with consistent supply of animal products. I was daily eating some form of animal products, whether it would be eggs, it would be meat, it would be fish, something I was consuming. I was not very heavy on red meat consumption, so I was eating red meat occasionally. I would eat lamb. This is the healthiest form of red meat. If you ever consider eating it, lamb is the purest and the safest meat to consume out of all of them. So I was consuming red meat within the limits which are considered safe to not cause other troubles. And what we see here is that diet was not promoting the growth of ferritin. Supplement was. So here we see the notable increase in ferritin stores. And what we see is that on raw diet, it increases. So this is an unprecedented change for me. Without supplementation, I was able to increase my ferritin that always was low on the lower border or below the bottom of the reference range. So with that, I make a conclusion that a consistent consumption of iron-rich plant foods, let's write it down here. Consistent consumption of non-heme iron sources is more beneficial for iron anemia than occasional meat consumption. This is the conclusion that I make for myself based just looking at this data. So because animal sources, along with that Mediterranean diet, was not promoting increase in ferritin. Here it was promoting it. So what you can tell? You can say that, okay, you went from you restored your ferritin, and then it dropped. What if the data that we're observing now is the consequence of that iron supplementation? It was in 2021. I found the article, I will attach it in the description, that states that if hemoglobin levels are fine, and my hemoglobin was always fine, it was never like pushing the limits, then if ferritin is low, then if you restore it with supplements, then this ferritin will drop back down very quickly. So it's also, if it's not in the conditions when it's not hemoglobin limited, ferritin drops very quickly. So saying that I'm still reaping the consequences, I'm still thriving off the consequences of that supplementation is not based. So this is diet-induced increase in ferritin stores. So this is what makes me think that I am not iron limited in terms of developing the conditions preceding anemia. So if we look here too at the iron consumption and actually its concentration in blood increased compared to the past. So in the past, I had history of not even hitting the reference range of iron in my blood. So that diet, again, with inclusion of animal products, was not supplying enough iron. And now, again, if we revisit my video with nutritional data, we see that iron I get 200% per day. It's arguable that supplementation with vitamin C can increase iron absorption. I found some articles that dispute that claim, but my diet is also rich in vitamin C, of course. So according to all the previous knowledge, previous data, vitamin C is supposed to facilitate absorption of iron. If we treat this as truth, then this may be a driving factor, along with, again, with just consistent consumption of iron, plus other factors. Perhaps my GI tract started absorbing nutrients better because I excluded certain foods. Because I will remind you that raw diet did the following thing to me. I lost my migraines. I lost my acne. Like I had acne, deep acne that was coming like frequently. I never was without acne, so I always had either like deep acne or healing scars and stuff like that. So those things would tell me that something that I was consuming was not good for my body. Of course, earlier, like in 2018, which I don't have data for, I also drank coffee. I don't remember if I quit it in 2020 or 2019, so somewhere around here, I also had drank coffee.
So perhaps that had some influence. But then why 2020 and 2021 would be also the same with some problems? It would make sense. So it's not necessarily caffeine consumption. Other factors that would prevent iron from absorption would be calcium. I didn't do any dairy. Long before, maybe in 2018, I supplemented with calcium, but not anymore. So again, to recap this slide, what we see, one conclusion is that supplement was putting me in dangerously high levels of iron in the blood. That's why I was advised to stop taking the supplement and go with plant-based greens and legumes rich diet to restore my iron stores. And what we see from the ferritin data, we see that consistent consumption of iron rich plant foods, in my case, was able to restore ferritin better than healthy levels of consumption of iron rich animal foods. So this is a victory of mine because I was never able to observe this data in the past. My ferritin was always low, except for the supplement. So I felt kind of defeated until recently. So if we now go back, all of this iron data, enough iron coming with diet and increased ferritin proves to me again that this observation is likely. This one is almost explicitly telling me that it's B12 limit, B12 induced pre-anemic state. But all of these trends tell me that it is indeed B12. And so I would almost rule out iron deficiency from the picture. And like my initial instinct here is to go just get B12 supplement and eat it. I have it at home actually. I just need to eat it. But because I was running an experiment to see if seaweed can maintain healthy levels of B12. Apparently it doesn't. So, or I was approaching B12 deficiency in the past and now it just bloomed. So maybe that's what happened. But in any way, I'm not going to risk it. I'm going to go on B12 supplementation to fix this problem and to restore my hemoglobin a little bit, to make it higher. Even though, now it doesn't reflect on, like, I don't have any fitness limits, I don't have anything. The only thing that makes me think that I can be approaching anemia is literally the fact that first 2 days of my periods I feel lightheaded. So that is what's concerning. This what also supports these observations and inspires me to take immediate action to restore B12, because I don't think that iron is the blame here. Because, there are components that participate in erythropoiesis, that creation of red blood cells. And iron is only one element it requires. It requires folate, it requires B12, it requires magnesium. So magnesium is not the issue. I get a lot of it. I'll show you in the next plot. But this is the battle that I consider successful. What I would do with iron, I would continue being diligent with consuming my salads, with consuming hemp, because those things, they're rich in iron, and that's just undoubtedly that they help, that they work to make it happen. Now that we recapped on that, with B12, another comment. With B12, actually, just to also remind you of that notion, is that a lot of people who grew up either getting B12 from either animal sources or from supplements, they may never be able to develop the ability to synthesize B12 and absorb it from the bacterial synthesis. So I am very open to just taking a supplement at this point. Because also another thing, before 2018, 2019, I was always on some supplement. And I was always taking multivitamins, not just some target vitamins before then. Since early adolescence, my stepfather was researching that. He was a doctor, so we always had some novel supplements and the vitamins. I was on Optimum Nutrition, that's that brand that produces protein powders, BCAA, and also vitamins for women that also have high levels of iron. So I was taking multivitamins my entire life. So seeing this data on non-supplemented diet is also pretty interesting. And again, it totally justifies for me just going on B12 supplement, because the consequences of not taking B12 supplement can be bad. And again, I started noticing this lightheadedness when I actually lose blood. So this, to me, I mean, it's a very uncomfortable thing that I don't want to experience. This is why I'm going B12 supplement. Now we're going to look at the electrolytes. So I put sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, and chloride. Unfortunately for electrolytes, or not unfortunately necessarily, I do not have year-based data. I only have 2021 before raw, right before raw diet, and immediately recently, so 2023. So what we see here is that there's very minute change in sodium levels, potassium. These things, you should understand that they are very reactive as well. Some of these. So if you eat a lot of sodium, it skyrockets, potassium and stuff like that. Now, these values are within the reference range, so they're also approaching, magnesium is approaching the top of the reference range here, and you see that magnesium increased a little bit but insignificantly. If you see the scale bar here, it goes from 0.8 to 1.2. So this change is really, really small. Calcium increased. Calcium actually has much narrower reference range. I'm sitting somewhere around the middle, or beyond the middle point, so towards the high end of calcium, but not nearly close to the edges. Calcium actually is such a mineral that can, if you go to extreme ranges, can indicate certain serious conditions. But in general, body regulates calcium. It sits in the very narrow range, and this one falls right around the middle. So there's nothing to be concerned about. The thing that I want to see is just for giggles that there are electrolytes. When you drink distilled water, there is no problem with minerals. The thing here, of course, can be that, calcium, you can technically desorb skeleton in order to sustain normal levels of calcium, but it would be in the deficient range. It wouldn't be approaching the high end of it, so I'm not worried about this. Calcium apparently getting enough from the diet. And as well as magnesium, of course, because plant-based diet is extremely rich in magnesium, sodium, potassium. I mean, eat a melon, watermelon, or eat a pickle or some like olives or something, and see them fluctuate. So these parameters are not really interesting. So I think that here conclusion is that raw diet didn't have any particular influence on the electrolyte levels. And another note is that it's very reactive parameter for sodium, potassium, for example, magnesium. Then calcium is sufficient on this diet. And again, I get 100% RDV of calcium, so it's very good level from the diet. And all greens are super rich in calcium. And the debate about oxalates, whether we can separate calcium from the oxalate molecule, clearly we can. So this is a really cool study that shows that distilled water is not a problem, raw vegan diet is not a problem in terms of getting some of these minerals. So now we need to look at another thing, is protein. So let's now look at the protein graph. Here we have normalized values here, and before raw and after raw. All values are within the reference range. Before we start, I'll just tell you there's like nothing that pushes the limits necessarily. And this is zoomed in scale. We go from 0.8 to 2 in order to resolve some mini changes here. And here are those 7 key test parameters that are usually being tested in people. There are more, but my doctor didn't include them in this time, so some ratios. But we can do the math if we could do the math if they were relevant or interesting, but they're not. Let's start with one. It's urea that's being formed in response to breaking down the proteins. So when protein is broken down, this thing is released. When it's high, it's kidney disease, and when it's low, it can be due to low protein diet, malnutrition, or some crazy things that I don't think are worth mentioning. So this parameter dropped, which means that there may be some lack of protein, but then I didn't read in depth whether it's being produced in response to breaking down complex proteins, or when we break the polypeptide chains and into separate amino acids. I don't know if that's produced in response to that, because this clearly would be lower in that case, because I don't eat complex proteins. I eat proteins that are more like simpler proteins that are bound to carbohydrates. So if that's the case, then this explains this drop. If not, then okay, it's also a very reactive thing. If you read how to prepare for blood test for people with some concerns with like some metabolic problems, with kidney disease, they advise to avoid eating high protein foods the night before the test. So you need to take this test fasted, and you need to avoid high protein foods before the test. Since it's a reactive thing, I don't know, maybe if I ate a bowl of hemp meal or nuts, maybe that would skyrocket. Or if I ate beans, some like chili or something, that would be high. That was low. Depending on what it's released in response to, this would explain it. Or again, some dietary fluctuations. Then creatinine, I always had it in this range, and I had once in my life after a very heavy workout, I had high creatinine, but usually, I mean, it's pretty steady. You see, it didn't change almost at all. I think it's even exactly the same it was in the past, so nothing has changed there. If it's low, which it's not, in my case, when it's low, it indicates decreased muscle mass or malnutrition. But my creatinine sits around middle of the reference range, so it's not low by any means, and which indicates to me that there's no malnutrition or muscle mass, which is also a very interesting parameter because correlating it with muscle mass is kind of neat. And my muscle mass is by no means low. So then we go to the total protein here. Total protein is another reactive parameter, but we see that before raw diet it was taken on a random day. During the raw diet, after 3 years on raw diet, was taken on a normal random day, we see that it even increased a little bit. This increase is insignificant, but total amount of protein in blood is pretty steady. I would say this change is also very small. If there was some sign of malnutrition or malabsorption, then it would be low. But it's not. So it's very reasonable. It also sits somewhere in the middle of the reference range, so there's nothing to be concerned about. Apparently, protein is not a concern from these two data points. There's no how people like to say that vegans digest their body, they digest their muscles. Nope. It apparently doesn't happen. So we can conclude that protein is coming. Not protein is coming, but amino acids are coming in sufficient amounts in order for the body to build protein. Then we'll go to this parameter. When it increases, it indicates that there is no problem with getting protein. Then some fluctuations when it's approaching some end of the reference range. When it's too low or too high, can indicate thyroid problems, zinc deficiency, or anemia, which are not the case in this case. So then we go to see those two enzymes. These are related to the liver function, these two things. And we see the decrease in AST and ALT. They are aspartate aminotransferase and alanine transaminase. So these are two enzymes that are produced by the liver, and they're also related to protein synthesis. And normally those enzymes should be low. So people usually test for, if we talk about AST, people usually talk about decreasing it, needing to decrease it, because it can indicate, if it's high, that it can indicate liver damage. In case when it starts pushing the lower limits, then it can mean that there can be B6 deficiency. Then another thing here with ALT enzyme, if it's lower than normal, then it can be B6 deficient. But if I was to draw the reference ranges here, they would go beyond the limits of this screen. So it's very, very broad range. You really need to encounter a certain, a very severe condition in order to see the differences here. These things fluctuate around in relatively to the reference range. This change is so small that, let me change the color of my brush. These changes are so small, these ones, relatively to the reference range, that there's nothing serious to talk about really. It may indicate that maybe I was not getting so much of B6. If I'm not mistaken, B6 will be found in fortified pasta and in rice, which I avoid because of migraines. These things may kind of perhaps suggest that there may be some B6 lack of supplementation, which is still decent. There's clearly no deficiency because it's near the middle of the reference range, these values. There's like literally nothing to be concerned about. If ALT, just a note, ALT, if it's high, then it can indicate, again, approaching that like super high limit, then it can indicate fatty liver. So looking at it in dynamics here, relatively to the reference, it's a very small change. We could push it high. But yeah, maybe again, B6 vitamin is something that I need to pay closer attention to. Let's write it in a very sloppy fashion. B6 vitamin, we'll eat bananas, I guess. Bananas, by the way, nowadays, you know that there is a crisis, banana crisis, because the bananas started having some parasites. If you buy organic bananas, fungal infections, so bananas are going to come to extinction if there is no GMO or pesticide interference. So we'll see what happens to our trusty bananas. But better research other sources of B6 in the meantime, because bananas actually went nuts lately. I totally despise what they turned into. In English, I will need assistance from Google to educate myself on how it's pronounced. Probably I would speculate it's bilirubin, probably. So in general, it should be low, and it decreased. Also, might not be such significant change in decrease. There was no problem in the past before going raw, so there was no point of concern. Usually, people want to decrease it because increased bilirubin corresponds to increased rate of red blood cell destruction. Actually, in some cases, increased bilirubin or I will say it in Russian. Bilirubin can indicate can be a symptom of anemia caused by this excessive red blood cell destruction. What we observe here is the reduction of the bilirubin, which is also, not a very interesting data point. Now we're going on after the protein, so let's recap what we observed here. What I proved by this data is that sufficient protein slash amino acid consumption, sufficient absorption, good muscle mass. So these are the main takeaways from this slide on protein. Let's say that possibly increase B6 consumption. Maybe not. Again, this drop is so little, so small, that it may be just my liver functions slightly differently. Maybe I cleared it up because I eat so much food that allows liver to perform at its peak. So of course my liver function must have changed just by virtue of my diet. But protein is sufficient. I synthesize good amount of protein. Sufficient amount of protein is even increased compared to before raw. I get almost 100% of protein, 93 grams of protein per day. It's the complete protein. I get all amino acids with that. So I would be really surprised if I had some deficit here. In fact, I see that there is possibly more efficient metabolism of protein at this point. So after we've concluded the protein drama, let's go to see other parameters that I plotted here. So here we can see thyroid stimulating hormone, how it fluctuated. On the yearly basis, I have only 3 data points, 19, 2021 before raw, and then after 3 years on raw diet. Because there is also concern that not supplying certain compounds from meat can cause hypothyroidism or hyperthyroidism. I don't remember what the condition was. Again, I like to focus on health. I don't like to focus on conditions. And here we can see that in 2019, I was 10% over. 2021, I was 10% under. So for me, it says that the fluctuations of 10% are physiological, up and down, are physiological for me. So I don't see any drastic change in that. This time around, there was 3 and 4. There was 2 other hormones that are usually tested that respond to iodine, but Since there was no concern with TSH itself, I guess she didn't prescribe me on any further studies on thyroid. So apparently with thyroid I get enough iodine because again I eat seaweed that doesn't apparently supply me enough B12, but apparently supplies me with enough iodine. Now, before I used to eat eggs. Eggs must be high in iodine if they're fed naturally, and then also seafood. I always ate fish at least once or twice a week, or maybe more frequently in the past before going raw vegan. So seaweed apparently is sufficient for iodine supplementation for me, and I won't be doing anything with my thyroid with any like further iodine supplementation considerations or anything like that. To me, this is a validation of this side of my diet. And then if we look at the cholesterol related thing, when I just came to the doctor, it was very funny because she was like, 29, you're at that age when we need to test for cholesterol. And I'm like, okay, so it's my first time actually doing this test because I never was, in 2021, I was with 27. Never was something that I would be concerned about, or 26 I was, right? I'm summer, so yeah. Never tested for cholesterol before, but this time around, so I had to plot these bars. This is the range of cholesterol, the allowed range. This is the point beyond which it's considered unhealthy, so it's desirable to have cholesterol level below this line here. So I'm here. Everything's fine. I produce cholesterol, which is also another thing is that raw vegans, especially raw vegans, don't have enough fat. They cannot produce cholesterol. Without cholesterol, their hormones go out in the space to Pluto. So shows that the synthesis happens in sufficient quantities, and I am somewhat close to where it would be considered on the higher end. So I am in the healthiest range of cholesterol possible. Then triglycerides are also in the healthy range. This is the same story. Everything below this line is considered desirable. With triglycerides, they usually actually put the limit below. So for cholesterol, there is a range. For triglycerides, it's just like stay below this line. For HDL, then I am also in the healthy range. For HDL, you want to be higher than this line, so you want to have higher levels of that. So I'm also in the healthy range of HDL. And then for LDL, I am also in the healthy range. I still have it. It's also supposed to be below this line. But yeah, everything happens. My liver produces all of these things, and I don't get this bad cholesterol from animal products anymore. But everything else that's supposed to participate in steroid hormone production still is being produced, so it's totally fine. Then zinc. With zinc, why I tested zinc? Because I saw this note that vegans and raw vegans get copper intoxication because they get too much copper with food. I started digging into that. Copper and zinc are antagonist minerals, and if you eat too much copper and not enough zinc, you can end up with copper intoxication. And another thing, if you don't get enough copper, or if you eat copper and zinc, then copper may not be metabolized properly. But the concern is specifically for copper toxicity. So I decided to check if my zinc is at sufficient level, because if they are antagonists, then the zinc would be low. But in fact, I happen to have I happen to be in the middle of the reference range for zinc. So I don't supplement with zinc. I get it only from food, from dietary sources such as hemp, such as seeds, such as greens, and it happened to be in the middle. So it's very low, very very optimal, very good level of zinc, which clearly states to me that I must not have excessive copper. And in fact, when I started researching that, I realized that copper toxicity can happen if a person literally eats copper from hot dishes, from copper vessels, from copper like bowls, cups, or if they get it from the faucet water. So this is when it can be problematic, when people get actually copper oxide or copper in whatever bound form. And I drink distilled water, so I don't get copper from those sources. The only source of copper I get is dietary source. Of course, I get a lot of it, and again, it's all in the nutrition breakdown video. I get a ton of copper, but it's regulated. The metabolism of those metals is regulated because they're bound. They're bound minerals. So body takes as much as it needs, and the excess, the fiber is such a magic regulatory thing that allows you to get just the essentials from food. And a lot of the excessive things just get eliminated. So that's why I'm saying that on my Instagram, I made a reel about healthy diet. And what I stated there is that healthy diet is in the balance between supply of nutrients and effective elimination. Raw diet, like for example, carnivore diet, can be detoxification limited. So yes, it supplies a lot of nutrients, but people don't remove the waste products efficiently. So it's intoxicating diet. It's a diet that is intoxicating people, as well as supplying enough nutrition. It also supplies a lot of unwanted substances. With plant-based diet, what happens is that we enter the regime in which we may end up being in the nutrition limited zone, right? So we may end up not supplying enough nutrition while eliminating waste very readily and effectively. So this is why I make such an accent on actually building a very sustainable, very complete diet on consisting of raw foods, because we want to, while taking advantage of excellent detoxification properties of this diet, we also want to hit all our nutritional goals. So this is why I did this test specifically, and all of this study in order to determine whether my diet is sufficient or not. And this again, like with enough iron consumption, I should say consumption here, with enough zinc consumption, because zinc is another thing that's usually considered to be insufficient on plant diets. If you look at any forums, any web resources, zinc is something challenging for people to get. I apparently get it enough from plant sources. Again, I designed my diet specifically to hit the good ranges of those minerals. And with protein as well. So in conclusion, what I will write is that I am likely B12 deficient. Then second claim is that I supply enough iron. Number 3, the third thing is, let me change this real quick and let me make it a little bit bigger. We'll say that there's enough protein in this diet. Enough protein, good absorption. Number 4, we say that there's enough zinc. Number 5, distilled water doesn't wreck electrolyte balance. Minerals come from food. Indirectly, we will state that there is no copper toxicity. Number 7, what will we say? That B12 to be B12 or folate to be tested urgently. And unfortunately, it's so stupid that this data was not included. Doctor just forgot, because I guess I was overwhelming her checking on other things like that, on other things to include. So she forgot that. It's a bummer. To be tested urgently, and I would supplement with B12 right now. But again, it would be nice to have data to prove that claim, because again, I analyzed all of this stuff, and this tells to me that it's B12 deficiency, but who knows? So then another thing is that animal products are not required for thyroid functioning. And then another thing is that iodine consumption is adequate. So here we go. Here are some conclusions that I drew from this study, and let's discuss in the comments what you would say. And my message in the end is, again, employ analytical tools in order to determine whether your diet is sufficient, if that it's not deficient. Because here you see, if this anemia, for example, progressed, if I let this situation progress, then I will start like my blissful, enjoyable diet that saved me from migraines, that saved me from acne, that gave me so much energy, suddenly would rid me of energy, and I would start feeling weak. And what will be my initial instinct? It would be the same as in many people who give up on plant-based diet without proper examination, without proper analysis. And I would just go and be like, okay, I'm off this diet because it clearly doesn't work. I would feel defeated and stuff like that. But in reality, this is likely a very simple fix to a simple action to take, which is take a damn supplement and just rock with that. Because again, I know my body specifics. This may not be the case for everyone. I'm not trying to stretch my data, my biology, my biochemistry onto anyone. I want to stretch my approach. I want to advise you to try this approach of actually employing medical system to reap some advantages for yourself. But I know that I was always on supplements. So I was getting B12 up to like when I was in my early 20s. I was actually getting injections. A couple of years in a row, I was getting injections annually or biannually of, there was whole complex of B vitamins, including B12. They're very stinky things. And then they make you smell like B vitamins. You know, if you know the smell, if you ever taken supplement. And before I always was supplementing with that. So there is a chance that I may not be ever able to synthesize my own B12 or extract it efficiently from food, which is something that I should probably embrace and settle for. Because again, I lost a family member to B12 deficiency. And this is not something that I'm willing to play with. And here I will thank you for your attention. I'm very happy to see your questions below in the comments. Absolutely check the description box for important information. And I will see you in the next video. Thank you and bye.